Good morning. Welcome back to Deer Corner. Very nice morning up here on this weekend of Tropical Storm Nicole. It's wet. We got about 2.5 inches of rain in about 12 hours. Yesterday it rained. The day before it rained. Today, this morning's a nice pretty morning. But today I'd like to bring up about our youth hunt. It went over very well. This year we had 3 weeks of youth hunting and had a very good time at it. I got up to Kentucky, got up there on the 2nd, and Tim and Sam and Brian, the 2 young adults, arrived on Thursday, which was the 3rd, and we took them hunting the 4th and the 5th, which was a Friday and Saturday. And we're kind of new to this, so we're learning as we go. But it's not only taking them hunting. They had chores to do. Each one of them cooked, cleaned, and did dishes and things to do, bringing firewood, just like camping. And that's what we did. We camped at the bunkhouse. But on the 3rd, which was a Thursday, we got done eating. And it was about 6:30, almost 7 o'clock, and I went out and I drew Brian. Brian is 15, and let me tell you a little bit about Brian. I knew Brian for several years, and I knew his grandpa. Brian's a single child, single parent, and when his mom was working, Grandpa Tim would watch him. And I think he started watching him when he was 3 years old. Now, Grandpa Tim, he was an outdoor person. He loved to fish, but he fished on the bank, and that's how we met. Where the 2 rivers come together up there, he had to park on the bridge and walk the bank all the way down, which is all 3/4 of a mile. Walking the bank to get to a spot where he liked to fish. Well, we were up at the property and went down to the river, and him and Brian were fishing. And I got to talking to him, and we agreed, and I brought it up to the other owners, property owners, to allow him to come into our camp where the bunkhouse is and park and be able to walk just 300 yards or so to the river instead of walking that distance down the bank. And that's how we got to meet him and Brian. And as things went through for several years, to give Mr. Tim something to do, or he just did it on his own, he started mowing the yard and keeping up the place, just so we allowed him to have access to fishing. And then we allowed him to hunt. Well, about 4 years ago, Mr. Tim passed away, and Brian lost a mentor. I mean, he actually had nobody. And for almost 5 years, Brian was fishing and hunting and playing in the woods. And then it just quit. We got to talking about this back in July about him, and we went down July and we went on down to where Mr. Tim used to live, knocked on the door, and they sold the house and it was on a couple acres, and they sold the house, and the people in it knew Becky, and Becky was Brian's mom and where they were, and they weren't far away. They were about 15 miles from where we're at. And so we went and got a basket of fruit and went down and visited. And she knew us. And Brian knew us after years. And that's how we got Brian up here to hunt. So Brian showed up to hunt, and I took Brian out for 2 days. Well, that evening, now you got to take in consideration where our camp is, and that's about a 500+ acre cornfield. And we have a 14-foot easement that runs down through the center of that for our driveway to get to our camp, our property. And you know, farmers, they'll farm every inch, and I don't think there's 11 foot. I don't think there's 10 foot out of that 14, but we don't care. That's okay. But we walked that driveway. Well, I walked the driveway, get some exercise before I turn in, and it's 410 feet long. And Brian and I went walking down to the end of the drive to the road, and coming back, looked over there, and I said, "Brian, what do you see?" He looking around, and I pointed him out. He goes, "There's a deer there, Mr. John." And I said, "Yeah, deer coming out in the cornfield just before dark." Now, there's still, I think, 42 acres that isn't, the corn's not picked yet, due to the fact that the farmer said he has nowhere to put it. His grain bins are full, the river's drying up, no barges going, so there's 42 acres left to go. And here the deer are out in this field coming out right before dark. So, you know, we walked back to the bunkhouse and went in, and Brian mentioned it to him that there's deer out in the cornfield. And there's 3 other property owners there, plus a couple other young adults, and we're sitting around talking about it. And on our way back, I walked out in that cornfield maybe 20 feet, 30 feet, picked up an ear of corn that was on the ground. And I shucked it out some and looked at it, and gave it to Brian, and he looked at it, and we threw it back in there. Now, what I found out on that ear of corn, it's been laying on the ground. Now, they've been having rain, but very, very warm weather. And that corn was swelling up. And actually, some of the kernels popping off and were sprouting. So, that corn laying on the ground was actually sprouting. And I mentioned that to the other owners, the other hunters. So we're discussing this. And that comes to how I chose the deer stand I was going to take Brian to. See, I was going to hunt with Brian just like I'm going to hunt myself. There's pressure there, but not a whole lot of pressure at the time. And a lot of dry food out there. I mean, the corn, I could see it. Corn's a dry grain. And everybody's hunting it that they're going to be going to water. So I sat there at the table talking. I said, "No, I don't think they have to go to water because there's enough moisture in that corn laying on the ground that they can get by with without going to water." And I did mention it. I'm not holding things back from the other property owners. And I let them know. And I also let them know that this buck that I've been seeing through the summer, the fall, the summer, and I've seen him several times here, you know, behind the bunkhouse. But how I chose to stand was, one, the weather. Now, it's warm. It was actually warm. It would get almost 80 degrees in the day, drop down to 60 at night. and that's really warm to be hunting. So deer weren't actually moving a whole lot. They didn't have to move. They can go out and feed, come in and lay down. They didn't have to burn up a lot of food to stay warm. To the wind. The wind was going either direction. There was no main direction of wind. Then 3, how they were hunting and the pressure they were hunting. So I chose to stand on the corn, on the moisture of the corn. That they were not coming out of that cornfield and they were not going deep into the woods to bed down. They didn't have to. So that's the stand I chosen to go to. Now Brian and I were in that stand, and I'd say about 9 o'clock we seen a set of does go by. Went up a draw. Now I hunt all day. If I'm in a stand, I stay in all day. But I had Brian with me. He's 15. Patience, they just don't have patience. So we made it a point with the young adults to come out at 10:30, regardless, and go back in at 2. So we come out at 10:30, got to the bunkhouse to eat dinner about 11, and sat around and discussed what we seen, and I went back to the same stand at 2 o'clock. Well, it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock. We seen some more does come between us and the cornfield. They were about 10, 15 feet in the timber line along the cornfield, and then they went up a little draw. And if you go to the right side of the draw, you go to the bunkhouse. You go to the left side of the draw, you go into the cornfield. So them does were coming up and going into that draw and getting ready to come out just before dark into the cornfield. And we could have shot a doe, but I said, Brian, we got another day. Let's just wait and see what happens. And about 6 o'clock, here come a little 8-point buck behind the does. And I pointed it out. I said, see, there you go, Brian. There's a buck right there. And we got to talking. He was following the does right along the same path, 10, 15 feet in the timber line outside the cornfield. But he did not go up the draw. He didn't act correct to me on body language. He would get to the point of the mouth of the draw going on up, just to that point, and he would stop and paw at the ground a little bit. Then he would look up and go towards the cornfield, not go out in it, and then make a circle and come back around. But he would not go up that draw, nor would he go out in the cornfield. But then he'd come back around the same direction. Now, a lot of people don't think about this. Humans aren't the only animal that favor a right hand to a left hand. I'm right-handed, and there are some left-handers out there. All animals favor one side or the other, but you got to know the body language. And I don't think people really thought of that. Hunters have not thought about reading body language on a deer. But that little buck, he would paw at the ground with his front right paw. I didn't, I'm looking at it. Something just isn't right. I said, okay, Brian, go ahead. We'll get ready. We'll get set up. You can take him. But then in a little bit, he stomped the ground with his back right paw. I said, Brian, hold on. Hold on. There's something else here. And knowing the body language of a buck, if he's stomping his back paws, and usually if you know and watch the buck fight, and I've seen several of them, they'll rear on their back legs and push and butt heads. So he was making a motion by stomping his back leg that he was going to rear up on something. And that's the body language of knowing deer. And that sun was just getting to the right point. It was just barely coming across that hillside and coming through the timber. And all of a sudden, that buck on the other side, it lit him up. It was like you put a spotlight on that buck and you seen him. He just stuck out like a sore thumb. And I touched Brian on the shoulder and I pointed over there, that direction. And he looked up and he looked down. I said, get the scope on him, get him where you could see him. And he looked at him. He goes, Mr. John, that's a deer. He said, Mr. John, that's a big deer. He's bigger than this one. I said, yeah. But let's wait a minute. Let's just wait a little bit. He's going to move. He's going to get out of that sun. He's going to go back up there in that shady area, back up in there. But that's what he did. Once that sun got on him, he knew he was seen. He could be seen. So he moved like 20 feet closer. And then he stepped up into this thicket. And that gave us a perfect broad shot. Just, he lined himself up. So to make the story short, I got Brian ready. I got him down there. He got set up. He seen the buck. And he was getting ready. And I said, okay, let's go ahead and do this. So I said, put the crosshairs behind his ear and down below his ear, and I explained where I wanted him to shoot him. Then I started talking to him about how to make a hamburger. And that's what's funny. A lot of people don't think about it, but he was getting jittery and kind of shaking, jittery. And I wanted him to have a good one shot, a good clean shot. So I got to thinking about telling him how to make a hamburger. Get a bun, put the hamburger on it, put the cheese on it, put the pickle on it, put the ketchup and mustard on it. And meanwhile I said, you got the scope on him where you need to shoot him? He would say, yeah. And then I got to talking to him about making the hamburger. Then I said, squeeze the trigger, scratch your nose. And he squeezed the trigger and that deer went down, dropped perfectly. He made a perfect shot. Couldn't do it better myself. But that's when he really got to shaking. I'm glad to see it. I was there, and he really got anxious. But that deer didn't go nowhere but straight down. And it was almost 7 o'clock. We got the deer out. It was after dark. 2 of us had to drag the deer out, load it up, and get it up there. But I'm proud of him. He killed a very, very nice deer. We had a very good time at it. And I'm also proud to bring the trophy back home. I got the trophy again for the 2nd year for the largest buck killed with youth, young adults. So I got to bring it home. And I am going to show some of the videos of the youth hunt, young adult hunt. I'm going to be bringing them up. But some of the owners, they don't want to show the area or the terrain or things like that of the property. I understand the reason why, and I'm going to do some editing and go ahead and just put all the youth hunts, young adult hunts on one video. But we all had a good time, and be glad to share this with you. Hit the like button. Go ahead and subscribe, and I'll bring you along. And if you're in the woods, be safe. Rather be safe than sorry.